For the past few years, I've always seemed to do a video regarding the console announcements or E3 announcements that we have gotten. I think I was probably doing that way before I was telling YouTube to go fuck himself. But fuck it, we're doing another one this year. Now, 2 years ago, I mean shit, we're talking almost exactly 2 years ago since I did that shit on June 17th. I did a series of videos on what the new consoles were doing right and wrong, and even said that Nintendo was fucked with the Wii U at the time. All the Nintendo fanboys cried and raged, and they threw their fucking Pokemons at me. But look at how fucking accurate that claim was. Everything in that video was dead on accurate. Everything, top to bottom. And even judging by Nintendo's lackluster showing this year, it only further proves I knew what the fuck I was talking about 2 years ago. Nintendo is fucked. And 2 years later, they are still fucked. I also did a video blasting Microsoft over their stupid shit, only for them to change their policies the day before my rant video was about to get posted. Fucking timing on that shit, man. The funny thing is, in that video, I was dead on accurate as to what Microsoft was going to do. Pretty much all the policies they wanted to change got reversed even before I put the fucking video up. Then in Sony's video, I praised them, but they said they didn't go for the jugular. Both console makers made massive mistakes, and Sony sat back and let them make mistakes instead of pouncing on that. But their gaming lineup could have put them in a lead that they would have never lost. And even though their sales are amazing for the PlayStation 4 right now, and they have a massive lead over Xbox and Wii U, their gaming library has been relatively thin. So each video was pretty accurate. But now, we come to this year, and one of the few things that I wanted to talk about, obviously, was Sony's conference. Their big thing was nostalgia. Obviously, they have the new game for Guerrilla Games, which looked pretty good. That dinosaur, RPG, open world, end of the fucking lifetime shit. I don't even know how to describe that shit, but I think that was their only new reveal. But obviously, they went for the nostalgia. They went for The Last Guardian, which came out fucking years ago, and they're finally releasing that motherfucker, which looks like next year, but who knows, we'll see when that shit finally comes out. They also had Shenmue 3, which to me, that was a big fucking announcement. The fact that they started it on Kickstarter, and they got the funding within, what, a fucking day or some shit like that? That was pretty fucking impressive. So I'm glad to see that game's finally coming back, and they're finally going to get the conclusion that they wanted in the game. But obviously, the big one was Final Fantasy VII, the remake. The reaction the crowd had for that game shows how much that game was wanted. However, this video is not going to talk about Final Fantasy, although I would love to do a video on that, and I'm sure people would love to hear what I have to say about that motherfucker, and yes, I will be getting that shit. But this video is about the biggest addition when it comes to Xbox, which is backwards compatibility. Now, let me just say this right now. Backwards compatibility is a good thing. It will always be a good thing. There is absolutely no negative to a gamer when it comes to backwards compatibility, and it's always going to be a feature that gamers want. It's a big reason I went out and got the PS3 Fat just before they rolled out the cheaper model with the emulator engines. I wanted the full PS2 engine, not some cheap imitation. So no matter how much I rip Microsoft and Sony right now, this is a feature that should be on every console, and that's the biggest fucking problem with Microsoft rolling this shit out now. In all honesty, you're 2 fucking years late to the party, motherfuckers. Not only are you late to the party, but you've opened yourself up to the speculation that there was compatibility from day one, and that's what's really going to irk the fuck out of people. Here's the issue I had with backwards compatibility being announced now. When Microsoft and Sony announced their consoles a few years ago and talked up all the features and the shit they were going to have, including all that TV crap that Xbox One was going to have. TV. Oh, that fucking shit, man. But anyway, the one thing that was missing was backwards compatibility on both consoles. Journalists questioned them, fans questioned them, gamers questioned them, and the responses from both companies were pretty similar. Sony said it wasn't possible to play PS3 discs on the PlayStation 4, but they were going to have some form of backwards compatibility in the future. That turned into this game rental service now, whatever the fuck that shit is. Microsoft never flat out denied anything, and they just said it's something they will look towards in the future. Most people assume that they had the same issues as Sony. The console didn't have the ability to play 360 games, and from a technical standpoint, that might have been the case. 360 used HD DVD style discs back then, while Xbox One is now on Blu-ray. I don't know about the technical differences, and I'm certainly no techie, but if Microsoft were to say it's 2 different players and it's just not possible, I would tend to take them at their word, but they never said that. Now fast forward to E3, and all of a sudden there's an announcement that older games will work. There's a list of 20 plus games, most of them are shitty, but obviously Mass Effect is a great game, so I was glad to see that one have backwards compatibility. But now you can play these shits. The fuck? Wait a second. How do you get around the technical issue? How did you manage to just patch that shit into your console and decide to announce that shit now? What kind of bullshit is this? You mean to tell me that since day one, you had the ability to do it and decided not to? Are you fucking kidding me? Why the fuck would you jerk your customers around like that? Why not just be honest from the get-go and say backwards compatibility is possible, but we didn't want people to just keep playing their 360 console? It's fucking stupid. Now you're telling us that thousands of older games will be available in the future, but some of them are subject to developers and publishers' approval. I'll talk about that in a minute. But the functionality was there all along. The ability to get past the technical barriers have been lifted, or a more likely scenario, they just didn't want to do it all that time. We know all the policies Microsoft originally came up with and how it turned off gamers when they realized that there would be a nickel and dime. So you hold back one of the bigger items that people would want? I mean, it was great that you eliminated all that bullshit for gamers about renting our fucking games. Oh, holy fuck, that was so goddamn stupid. But now, you're not going to let us play our older games. And that leads me to my next issue with backwards compatibility being rolled out now. Backwards compatibility is truly only relevant in the first 2 to 3 years of a console's life cycle, but in particular, that very first year. Because think about this for a second. When the new consoles are announced, what are their gaming libraries like? Those of you who bought the consoles early, on day one, let's say, what was the landscape like back then? Pretty shitty, right? I mean, you had some general crossover games like Call of Duty, Madden, Assassin's Creed, so you could play those on the 360, Xbox One, PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4. But obviously, if you could play it on an older console, you might as well keep playing it on the older console. You had a few games that were there, released on day one, that people enjoyed, but there was nothing overwhelming. There wasn't a game that said, I need to buy the new consoles. The opening libraries are so bare that playing older games bridges that gap until something better comes along. Why play PlayStation 4 when The Last of Us is still on PlayStation 3? Why play Xbox One when Gears of War is still on 360? After players exhausted their options for opening games, then they go back and they play what they have in their libraries. That's when people take advantage of backwards compatibility, when libraries are thin, when the games are not coming out for a few years and you have this brand new console with nothing to fucking play. But when you roll out backwards compatibility 2 years later, our libraries are finally starting to fill up. Our collection of games begin to grow, and the announcement for future games start to roll in, and that gets us excited for the future. Sure, Mass Effect 3 will hold me over. Sure, BioShock is always going to be a game people can revisit anytime you want to play that shit, because that is an awesome fucking game. But if a console maker created a kick-ass library of games from day one, then backwards compatibility becomes useless. Think about this for a second. If I told you that on launch day of the new consoles, that Halo 5, Uncharted 4, The Division, Forza, Gran Turismo, God of War 4, Gears of War 4, Destiny, Need for Speed, Re-Envision, Bloodborne, Last Guardian, Mass Effect 4, Final Fantasy, Titanfall, Super Mario, motherfucker, Zelda, Donkey Kong Country, Bayonetta, Metroid, Fallout were all available at launch and only on next-gen consoles, would you even give a flying fuck about backwards compatibility? Hell fucking no. If you were told every one of those fucking games was available on launch day and only on next-gen consoles, I wouldn't give two shits about backwards compatibility. Yeah, Uncharted 4, God of War, Mass Effect, Final Fantasy are all available on launch day. I don't give two shits about Grand Theft Auto 5. I wouldn't give a fuck about The Last of Us. But you give a motherfucker all of the best games, yes, backwards compatibility is fucking useless. But when you don't have all that shit, guess what? I'm gonna stick on my PlayStation 3. Bitch, please, the consoles weren't anything like that on day one. They had a whole bunch of crap at their launch. And that's when backwards compatibility becomes a feature that people want. When you give gamers enough content, they wouldn't have cared about backwards compatibility. But when the content is sparse, that's when people want to play their old shit. So rolling that shit out 2 years later is a nice addition, but it's 2 fucking years late. It was needed on day one. So to do this now is just a bunch of bullshit. Now, one final thing to know about backwards compatibility, and this is what Microsoft mentioned. It's going to be up to studios and publishers to determine which games they will allow to work. The fuck? Why the fuck would you give them that option? Why not just make every fucking game available and make this shit easier? And the answer is very simple. Studios nowadays are remaking and remastering new games. They're getting us to pay for older games that we already have in our collection. Case in point, last week I talked about remastering Call of Duty 4 and how I would buy that shit. And now, we have Sony announce that Square Enix is bringing back Final Fantasy VII to life and it'll be available in the future. Hell fucking yeah, I'm still buying that shit. But if a studio has plans on remaking something like Grand Theft Auto, why would Rockstar allow the console to just play the older versions of the game on the new console? Think about it. That would just torpedo their eventual sales of the remaster. So leaving it in their hands is like asking a criminal to watch your wallet for a second. I'm sure certain publishers and studios won't care, but some will. And some will deny access to their older games because people want them to buy the new shit from them. It's how the cycle of money keeps going. And I'm sure you will find one greedy scumbag company that doesn't want you to play their older games. I'm looking at you, Bethesda. But like I said, when you look at backwards compatibility, it's a great thing. I like it. But this late in the cycle, it's going to be a useless function at some point. Backwards compatibility works when the console's first released, not 2 years later after the fact and libraries start to build up. Backwards compatibility works when you have a small library of games, but after a few years, you build those up and it becomes a moot point. If libraries were amazing in year 1 and year 2, and games were popping out the ass ahead of time, then we wouldn't even be talking about this shit. But adding something 2 years later certainly appeals to the fans of the console that had the older console. This is a great selling feature for 360 fans who want to advance up to the Xbox One. Now, there were a lot of people that were on 360 and came over to PlayStation 4. And the reason why they did that was because the policies that Xbox One had were not fantastic. And they said, fuck it, I'm jumping ship. But for those of you guys who played on 360, you're still on 360, and now you see a legacy path towards your next console, sure, this is absolutely fantastic for you. However, when you look at what Sony did with PlayStation Now allows all those Xbox users who jump ship, those who are on 360 and wanted to come over to PlayStation 4, PlayStation Now allows them to go back and play some of those older games in the PlayStation library. Never got to play God of War? Sure, you can rent it and try it out now on the PlayStation 4. Never tried Uncharted? Sure, you can go back and try that motherfucker. Just because you're on 360, this doesn't limit you. Backwards compatibility for Microsoft is going to advance their next-gen console sales of Xbox One. It's not going to get people from PlayStation 3 over to Xbox One. So let's just say I have a PlayStation 3 and I go over to Xbox One. What does backwards compatibility do for me? I'm gonna go out and buy 360 games? Get the fuck out of here. I'm not gonna worry about that shit. The only audience this is going to appeal to are the legacy console owners. People that own the first Xbox, Xbox Uno or original. I don't even know what to call that shit now. 360 and now your Xbox One. But as far as trying to get all the Sony players over to their console, backwards compatibility isn't going to do it. It's a great feature, don't get me wrong, but it's not going to sell your consoles. It's going to sell your consoles from 360 owners all the way up to Xbox One, but as far as Sony owners, they're probably not going to be jumping ship as much as you think they will be. At the very least, it shows that although you're willing to pay attention to what fans ask for, you're a little late to the party. Granted, it's 2 years late and people can still go back and play the 360 games, but at the very least, you listen to fans and you surprise Sony with that announcement, and it shows that at least Microsoft is on the right path. It may not be the correct path, but at least they're getting there. Anyways, that does it for this year's E3 rant. I'm sure you guys will tune in next year to see what I have to say about next year's E3. So as always, rate, comment, subscribe, and all that good shit, and I'll see you guys in the next video.